Good morning, folks. Welcome to Ontario on a beautiful mid-March Saturday morning. It feels like mid-April. I've got all sorts of birds singing around me here. Red-winged blackbirds and a pair of geese just the other side of the shop in last year's cornfield. Well, today, folks, we're going to saw a little lumber. I've got a beautiful 14'6" white cedar log on the mill. It's got a bit of taper and it's got a bit of a bend to it. So I thought, let's make a video and let's talk about how I position logs on the mill. Now, the first thing you'll notice is I've got the butt end away from the saw head. So I'm going to start the saw into the top end of the log. Now, quite honestly, for our mill, on cedar and pine, it really makes no difference. But on frozen, knotty tamarack, sometimes white spruce, it does make a difference at times. It'll tend, if the blade is not perfectly sharp, to want to dive or wander a little bit. So I put it on properly with the little end towards the mill. Now, if we look at that over that length of log, we have got a lot of taper. So the first thing I do is I measure this end, and I've got just under 11.5. Let's go to the small end. Down here, I've got about 8.5. So that gives me a net difference of 3 inches. So what I do is I take half of that and I shim it, and I have all sorts of pieces of material around the mill, so I'm going to lift up that log and set it on that 1.5 inch shim. Now we've got the log so that the center line from this end to that end is pretty well parallel with the mill, and we'll get the most usable lumber out by doing that, because I do want to keep these pieces fairly long. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and take a look at my log stops on the far side to make sure that they're high enough but not too high so that the saw head hits them or the saw blade hits them. There, both log stops are at the right height, so it's going to hold the log in position, but there's no danger of hitting it with a saw blade. Isn't that so nice to hear Mr. Raven next door saying hello? Now you notice the log has a little bit of a bend to it. I placed the bend up on purpose. By putting the crown up, it's in the first cut I'm going to take. And the first cut, and then when I turn it 180 to slab off the other side, that determines generally the width of the piece of wood that I'm working with. So when I built the mill, I built 2 sets of dogs. One's general purpose, that's what I use to hold logs in place or cants in place for the rough cuts. And this is the finished dog here. The finished dog has a maximum height of 3/4 inch above the bed. That allows me to saw down to 1 inch lumber and without any danger of hitting the top of the dog. So now our stops are in place. All I need to do now is just take this dog, push it where I want it, and push my handle, and it's dogged in place. We'll do the same thing over here. There we go. Now we're ready for our first cut. The next question that I should ask myself, where should I set the mill for the first cut? So if I've got 11 inches, 11.5 here, 8.5 here, I know that my first little bit of travel of the saw head is probably not going to take anything off the log. But that's okay, because what's in the center of that log, I'd like to keep as long as possible. So I generally go 1 inch down on a small log like this and take a look. So 11.5, let's see where 10.5 would be here. And I think I'm even going to go lower than that. I think we'll make our first cut at 10. This is the scale of the mill here. Notice on the left hand side there's a traditional aluminum yardstick. I like imperial measurement. And on this side there's a row with 4, 6, 8, and 16. These are the actual cut lines when I want to cut lumber. Once I get my log into the shape I want it and I'm cutting 4/4 lumber, I just drop it down each time. And every notch takes into consideration the kerf of the saw, so I don't have to do any calculations in my head when I'm doing it. And I can go 4 inch or 4/4, 6/4, 8/4, and 16/4 or 4 inch lumber. Okay, so we said we're going to set this at, I think it was 10. There we go. We're set at 10. We'll make a cut, and bear in mind that many times you'll take a cut of slab wood and you'll say, oh, I should have had it a little deeper. Well, take another cut and throw that scrap piece in the scrap pile as well. And on our farm, it all goes up the chimney, so none of it goes to waste. Let's make a cut. So we've taken the top slab off. I'm going to undog it. We'll flip it over. We'll take out that shim and we'll take the bottom cut. When I built the mill, I also put a couple of round pieces of pipe in here that I can pry against to move logs over in cants. Sure makes life a lot easier to use mechanical advantage. So we took our first cut at 10, we're going to set this cut at 9. And we'll see what happens. We can always cut more off, but it's kind of hard to put more on. Looking at the log, you can see where there was a fair bit of taper. So now I'm going to flip it up, put this edge vertical, and I'm going to put my shim back in because we still have that same taper to cut out. Now we've got the log flipped, we're going to put our shim back in here. To help ensure that the next cut is 90 degrees to the bed, when I built the mill I put a square on it. That helps make things just a little easier. So let's see what size of cut we need now. If I go for the midpoint, which is almost here, I'm going to say 10.5. Okay, we'll start old Betsy up, we'll run her down and cut off that slab. Now we'll rotate that cant 180 degrees and we'll take the top slab off. So we've turned the log, now we've got our last cut. I'm going to measure it somewhere around the midpoint. And then I'm going to check my scale and see how close I am to 2-inch material. And I might get 1-inch board before I cut my 2-inch pieces. But we'll go take a look at the scale. Mr. Raven's really talking up a storm. So when I measured that cant, I came off with an ideal cut of about 8.5, 8 3/4. I come over here to the 4/4 scale, or the 8/4 scale, sorry, for 2-inch material, and I look where this lines up, and I line up with, just over 8.5. So that's what we'll set it. We'll make our first 2 cuts, and then because of we've got the stops up on the far side, I'm going to flip it again after my first 2 cuts. We'll lower the back stops, and then we'll set the 2 short dogs and finish our cutting. Well folks, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed sawing this log. We got 4 nice pieces of 2x8 out of that cedar log, and we're going to use it this summer, building an addition or a piece onto our summer kitchen that we built last summer. Well folks, I've had a lot of fun, and as always, thanks so much for joining me on this day. We look forward to seeing you again on Out of the House with Paul.